My daughter-in-law drove me into a blizzard and left me for dead in a snowbank all so she could steal my house. She smiled right at me, took the only emergency blanket and walked away, convinced her ungrateful plan to get rid of the old woman for good was perfect. But she made one tiny mistake. Her entire monstrous act was caught on a hidden camera, and I was about to make her watch it right before I took back everything she ever thought she was entitled to. You know, there's a certain kind of cheerfulness in the Midwest that's so bright it hurts your eyes. It's a shield, a polite wall people put up when things are anything but cheerful. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my son Daniel's car, and that wall was coming from my daughter-in-law Kayla. She was going on and on about my granddaughter's spelling bee trophy. Her voice a little too loud, a little too fast. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching her knuckles white as bone on the steering wheel. Every few seconds, her eyes would dart down to the phone in the cup holder, then back to the road, a tiny muscle twitching in her jaw. Outside, the first snowflakes of the big storm they'd been warning about all week were starting to drift down fat and lazy. For a woman who grew up in Michigan, Kayla seemed oddly unconcerned. Me, I've seen enough winters to know that's when you need to worry the most, when the snow looks like a postcard. A little knot of unease tightened in my stomach. She insisted on taking what she called a shortcut home from my doctor's appointment. The main roads would be a parking lot, she'd said, with that dazzling, empty smile. I knew that county road. It was fine on a clear day, but it was lonely. Not many houses and cell service was a joke. Still, you don't argue. That's not how we do things. You just nod and smile back. But as we turned off the highway, the snow stopped being lazy. It came in a rush, a thick, swirling curtain of white that erased the world. The car began to feel small and fragile. Kayla's cheerful mask started to crack. I heard her muttering under her breath, something about needing to make a deadline, about how everything was riding on this. My unease curdled into real concern. The tires were slipping on the ice I knew was forming under the fresh powder, and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers was the only thing proving we were still moving forward. Then it happened. A skid, but it didn't feel like a normal one. It felt like a deliberate turn of the wheel, a sharp, decisive movement that sent us sliding gracefully into a deep snowbank on the side of the road. The engine stalled. For a moment, there was only silence and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. Kayla let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. She banged her fist on the dashboard, shouting about the stupid car, but her eyes, when they turned to me, weren't just angry. They held a strange, cold resolve. She told me the engine was dead, that she could see a light from a house up the road. She'd go get help, she said. I should just wait here, stay warm. Before I could even get a word out, she was out of the car. But she didn't just leave. She opened the back door and took the extra wool blanket from the seat. She even took the emergency kit from the trunk. It was to show them we were serious, she'd called back over her shoulder. I watched her figure dissolve into the whiteout, and a dread so profound it felt like ice water in my veins washed over me. It wasn't the cold of the car I was feeling. It was the cold of her walking away. Hours passed. I don't know how many. The world inside the car became a frozen bubble of silence. The cold wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a presence, a heavy thing that pressed down on me, stealing my breath, slowing my heart. I shivered until I couldn't shiver anymore, until my body was just a numb, heavy weight. I knew then. No one was coming back. This was it. I thought of my late husband, of my son, of my granddaughter's bright smile. I closed my eyes and let the darkness pull me under. Just as I was slipping away, a shape appeared at my window, a ghost in the storm. There was a tapping sound, sharp and insistent. A man's face, weathered and grim, peered in at me. It was Jack Turner, my reclusive neighbor, a retired Ford man just like my husband had been. He wrenched the door open and half carried me to his truck, the blast of the heater so hot it felt like a burn. As my mind slowly clawed its way back, he spoke. His voice was a low, angry rumble that cut through the fog in my head, and every word landed like a hammer blow. He told me he'd seen the whole thing. His security camera, the one he'd set up to watch for deer, pointed right at that stretch of road. He had it on video, he said. He told me she hadn't skidded. She had pushed the car into that ditch. Then she'd gotten out, looked right at me, sitting in the passenger seat, and simply walked away. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. The warmth of Jack Turner's kitchen was a strange thing. On the one hand, the scalding coffee he'd poured for me was slowly chasing the deep, biting cold from my bones, but on the other, the chilling words he'd just spoken about his security camera echoed in my mind, creating a different kind of frost inside me. Video evidence. The thought was a small, hard stone of power in the pit of my stomach. My body felt weak, 100 years old, but my mind was suddenly sharp and clear, like a winter sky after a storm. I knew I couldn't just sit there. I had to make the first move, and it had to be precise. I looked at Jack, my voice a little shaky but firm, and asked him to call my son Daniel. When I heard Daniel's voice frantic with worry, I took a breath and played the part. I made myself sound frail, confused, telling him there'd been some car trouble, that Kayla had gone for help, but must have gotten lost. I said a kind neighbor had found me. I didn't accuse. I didn't hint. I just created a blank space in the story, a space I knew Kayla would have to fill with a lie. And oh, what a lie it was. I could hear her in the background, a series of frantic, hissing whispers. Then Daniel was back on the line, his voice tight with a strange mix of relief and stress. He told me Kayla was home, that she was a wreck. She'd said the storm was too bad that she couldn't find the house, so she'd circled back to the main road to call for help. He said she'd been on the phone with the state troopers for an hour trying to get a search party. It was such a clumsy, panicked story, and it had one fatal flaw, a detail only a local would know for sure. There has never been a single bar of cell service on that county road. Not one. In that moment, her amateurish lie confirmed her guilt more completely than any confession. She wasn't just cruel. She was a sloppy, desperate fool. After I hung up, I met Jack's eyes across the cluttered kitchen table. We didn't need to say much. There was a grim understanding that passed between us, the kind of unspoken loyalty that's forged over decades of shared experience in a place like Dearborn. He knew people like my husband, and I knew people like him. He pushed a bowl of steaming soup in front of me, his expression stern. He told me his late wife had been a nurse, and she'd taught him how to spot a liar a mile away. He told me I was safe there, that the video wasn't going anywhere. We would use it, he said, when I was ready, when it would do the most damage. He wasn't just the man who had saved my life. He was my ally. The first and most important one I had. The next day, Daniel showed up, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. And with him was Kayla. She rushed to my side, her face a perfect mask of tearful relief, but her eyes were wide with a terror she couldn't hide. She began to smother me, tucking blankets around me, fussing with my pillows, her hands fluttering everywhere. She kept talking about how disoriented I must have been, how the cold plays tricks on your mind. Every word, every touch was a performance. It was excessive cloying, and it felt like the bars of a cage closing around me. I understood her new strategy instantly. If you can't get rid of the body, then you must get rid of the witness. She was no longer trying to kill me with cold. She was trying to bury me under a mountain of concerned lies, painting me as a confused, fragile old woman whose memory couldn't possibly be trusted. I let them take me home. It was the last thing I wanted to do, to leave the quiet safety of Jack's house and return to my own, which now felt like enemy territory. But I knew it was the next move in the game. I let my son Daniel help me to the car, leaning on him more than I needed to. I let Kayla arrange the pillows on the couch, my face a blank mask of tired confusion. I spoke very little. When they asked questions, I gave vague one-word answers. It was all a bit of a blur, I'd say. The storm was so bad, my silence became a canvas, and Kayla painted her masterpiece all over it. She filled in the gaps with the story of the terrible, unforeseeable accident. She recounted her heroic, harrowing journey to find help. I just sat there, nodding occasionally, and I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. It was a look of profound relief. She believed she was getting away with it. She thought the blizzard my age and my supposed confusion were the perfect cover. And that false sense of security was precisely the weapon I needed her to hand me. I couldn't see inside her house, of course, but I could see inside her. You don't live 70 years without learning to read the desperation that leaks out of people. I'd seen the glossy business cards for her little lifestyle brand in the recycling bin weeks ago. Kayla's Curated Life, it was called. It sounded expensive and empty, just like the look in her eyes these days. I imagined her in that big, heavily mortgaged house, surrounded by things she couldn't afford, staring at a stack of angry red letters from the bank. I could almost hear the echo of arguments with my son Daniel, him begging her to be practical, her accusing him of not believing in her dreams. Shame is a heavy coat to wear, and Kayla was buried under it. I knew with a certainty that chilled me that she looked at my modest, paid-off brick ranch home not as a place where her husband grew up, but as a lifeline, an asset. And that's how a person can twist their mind into believing that getting rid of an old woman isn't murder, but a form of salvation. While Kayla was busy curating her life of lies, I was quietly moving my own pieces into place. She thought I was napping for hours on end, exhausted from my ordeal. And I did nap. But I also made phone calls. I started with a man my late husband had known at the UAW legal aid office. I told him I was asking for a friend, of course a woman in a difficult situation who needed to understand her rights. He gave me some very clear, very helpful advice. My next call was to the Little Dearborn Credit Union, where I've kept a separate savings account for 40 years, the one my husband and I called our rainy day fund. It was more like a monsoon fund by now, and Kayla knew nothing about it. I had all my statements and documents redirected to a new P.O. box I'd asked Jack to set up for me. I confirmed twice that I was the only person with access to that account. I was a ghost in my own home, quietly preparing for a war she didn't even know had been declared. Her confidence grew with every day I spent being quiet and frail. She started treating me less like a person and more like a piece of furniture that needed dusting. And in her arrogance, she made her first critical mistake. She started helping me with my mail, sorting through it, before I saw it, under the guise of saving me from stress. One afternoon, a letter from my insurance company arrived. I saw her slip it into her purse. She must have thought I was completely out of it, that I wouldn't notice one missing envelope. I can only imagine the call she made, her voice dripping with fake concern, inquiring about end-of-life clauses and accidental death payouts. She must have been trying to see if she could still squeeze some kind of profit out of her failed plan. But desperate people are always too eager. They ask questions that are too specific. I have no doubt that somewhere in a file with my name on it, a very experienced insurance agent made a very detailed note about a very suspicious phone call from a very greedy daughter-in-law. For a week, I let the silence in my house do the work for me. I was a ghost at my own table, a frail old woman in my own living room. Kayla's arrogance grew like a weed in that silence. She was convinced she had won. My son Daniel was a nervous wreck caught between his wife's cloying performance and my quiet retreat. He just wanted everything to be normal again. The stage was set. I had made a call to Jack the night before. It was time. He arrived at my door the next afternoon right on schedule. Daniel and Kayla were both there, of course fluffing my pillows and asking if I needed anything. Jack was holding a beautiful-looking apple pie still warm from the oven. He said it was left over from his church bake sale, the perfect Trojan horse of Midwestern neighborliness. Kayla's smile was tight as he stepped inside. She hated any disruption to her controlled little world. Jack greeted them both with a polite nod, then he turned his attention to me. He told me, his voice calm and even, that he'd been going through his security footage from the night of the storm checking on a fallen tree branch. He said he'd found something odd, something he thought I ought to see. His words were not aggressive, not even accusatory, but they landed in the tense quiet of that room like stones, and I could see Kayla's composure begin to fray at the edges. That was my cue. Before Jack could say another word, I sat up straighter in my chair. I looked past Kayla, past the pie, past everything else, and I looked directly at my son. The frail, confused act I had been wearing for days simply fell away. My voice when I spoke was not the weak, reedy thing they had grown accustomed to. It was calm, it was steady, and it was filled with the quiet authority of a mother who was done playing games. I asked him a single, simple question. I told him to ask his wife why. Why she had gotten out of the car, walked over to my passenger door, unbuckled my seatbelt, and pulled my body out onto the side of the road before getting back in and driving the car into the ditch. The details were too specific, the sequence too precise. This wasn't the rambling of a confused old woman. It was the raw, brutal, and undeniable truth. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's face, which had been a mask of worried concern, crumpled into a canvas of dawning, abject horror. He turned to look at Kayla, and in that moment, she shattered. The mask of the doting daughter-in-law, the capable modern mother, the cheerful survivor, it all disintegrated. A dam of terror and shame and guilt that she had been holding back for months finally broke. She collapsed. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a hysterical, gut-wrenching sob that tore through the quiet of my living room. And through those sobs, the whole ugly story came pouring out. Not the story of the attempted murder, but the story behind it. The hidden history, the failed lifestyle brand, the mountain of credit card debt, the angry letters from the bank, the foreclosure notice that had arrived last week, the one that meant they were about to lose everything. She wailed at Daniel that she didn't know what else to do, that she was just trying to save them, to save their family. Her confession was a desperate plea for pity, but all I heard was a motive. The conspiracy of silence was finally irrevocably broken. I watched the entire messy, ugly breakdown without saying a single word. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was almost a physical thing. I was no longer the victim, the frail thing to be managed and deceived. I was the anchor in the storm she had created. I waited until her hysterical sobs quieted into ragged, exhausted gasps. Then I spoke. My voice cut through the tension like a knife. I told Daniel that we were going to have a family meeting the next night right here in this living room. I told him that it would be just us, that he would be there, and that for the first time in a long time he was going to listen. Then I turned to Jack, who had been standing by the door, a silent, grim-faced witness to the whole thing. I thanked him for the pie and told him we would see him tomorrow at 7. I was dictating the terms now. I was in command. And I left my son and his wife sitting there in the wreckage of their lies, powerless and utterly terrified of the final public reckoning that was now inescapably still to come. The next evening, the air in my living room was so thick you could have choked on it. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer blow. It was just the four of us. My son Daniel looked like a hollowed-out version of himself, aged 10 years in a single day. Kayla was beside him on the couch, pale and utterly silent, a porcelain doll that had been cracked down the middle. In the corner chair near the window sat Jack. He wasn't there as a neighbor anymore. He was a silent witness, a guardian of the truth. I had carefully staged the scene. On the coffee table right between them and me, I'd placed a neat stack of my own financial statements from the credit union. I wanted them to see the quiet, solid reality of my life, a stark contrast to the frantic, debt-ridden chaos they had created for themselves. I decided to let Daniel speak first. It was the last kindness I could offer him, a chance to try and make sense of the unthinkable. He stumbled through it, his voice cracking. He tried to explain the financial pressures, the shame, the desperation. He tried to frame what his wife had done not as an act of malice, but as the result of a panic attack, a complete mental breakdown. Kayla just sat there nodding weakly, mumbling apologies that sounded more like excuses. I listened. I let him say all of it, let him exhaust their entire flimsy narrative. When he was finally done, the silence rushed back in. Then calmly, I began to take their story apart piece by piece. I brought up the phone call, reminding him that it was impossible for her to have called the state troopers from a road with no cell service. I mentioned the inquiry she had made to my insurance company, the one about accidental death benefits. Each fact was a quiet, devastating blow, dismantling the fiction they had so desperately tried to build. Finally, I looked at my son, my heart aching for the pain I was about to cause him. I told him that I knew he wanted to believe it was just about the money that she had just panicked, but he needed to see the truth, all of it. I gave a small nod to Jack. He didn't say a word. He just took out his phone, connected a small cable to my television, and pressed play. And then there it was. The video filled the screen, time-stamped, clinically clear, and utterly damning. We saw the car pull over in the swirling snow. We saw Kayla get out her face, not panicked, but set with a grim, chilling purpose. We watched in absolute silence as the figure on the screen opened. My passenger door leaned in and unbuckled the seatbelt of the woman slumped in the seat. We watched her drag my body out of the car and leave it on the frozen ground before getting back behind the wheel and nudging the car into the ditch. The final horrifying image was of Kayla looking back one last time at my motionless form in the snow before she turned and walked away into the storm, disappearing. My son let out a sound. It wasn't a word, not a cry, but a choked guttural agony that seemed to be ripped from his very soul. In that moment, the polite facade of our family was not just shattered, it was annihilated. The judgment wasn't delivered in a loud verdict. It was in the dead, horrified silence that filled the room. I let the final image hang in the air for a moment before I turned off the TV. My voice when I spoke was not angry. It was filled with a sorrow so deep it felt like it might break me. I told Daniel that the police didn't need to be involved. I explained that it would destroy our granddaughter's life, and that was something I would not allow. But this, I told him, was over. The consequences were not up for debate. They were swift, firm, and they were final. Kayla would pack a bag and leave my house tonight. Daniel would file for divorce immediately. I would use my own funds, the money my husband and I had saved our entire lives, to pay off the most immediate debts, to keep him and my granddaughter from being thrown out onto the street. But it would be a loan, one he would repay to me every last cent. And until he could prove to me that he was a stable, capable and clear-eyed parent again, I would be taking full custody of his daughter. Then I turned to Kayla for the last time. My voice trembled not with rage, but with the sheer crushing weight of her betrayal. I told her that she had brought this poison into our family. Now she would leave, and she would never ever be part of it again. There was no shouting, no final dramatic confrontation. After my judgment was delivered, Kayla simply deflated. All the fight, the arrogance, the desperation, it all just drained out of her, leaving an empty gray shell. She went upstairs, packed a single bag, and walked out the front door without another word, disappearing into the night. The silence she left behind was louder than any argument. My son Daniel sat on the couch in that terrible silence for a long time, a broken man grappling with two profound betrayals. The woman he loved had not only tried to kill his mother, but had also built their entire life on a foundation of financial lies. That night, he moved into the spare bedroom, the one he'd grown up in. He was humbled, ashamed, and utterly lost. We began the slow, painful process of trying to explain a divorce to a little girl who couldn't understand using simple, sad words that felt like stones in my mouth. Word travels in a place like Dearborn, not in loud gossip, but in a quiet, unspoken current. No one knew the details, but they knew something profound had shifted in our family. Casseroles started appearing on the doorstep. Old friends from the VFW auxiliary would call just to check in. It was a quiet, sturdy net of community holding us up when we could barely stand. Months passed as they do, and the seasons began to turn. The world thaws even after the harshest winter. I would hear things now and then. Kayla had ended up in a town a few hours away, working a low-wage retail job and living in a small, sad apartment. She was a ghost of her former self, bitter, and still wrapped in a blanket of denial, telling anyone who would listen how her cruel mother-in-law had destroyed her life. Daniel, in contrast, began the slow, grueling path to accountability. He got a second job working weekends at a hardware store. Every 2 weeks, an envelope with cash would appear on the kitchen counter, a payment on the debt he now owed me. He spent his evenings not in front of the TV, but at the little table with his daughter, helping her with her homework, slowly, painstakingly rebuilding the trust his weakness had allowed to be broken. I found my own new path as well. I sold the big family home. It was a good house, but it was haunted by too many memories, both good and bad. I bought a small, manageable condo on the other side of town, a place filled with sunlight. With the money that was left, I set up an educational trust for my granddaughter, ensuring that her future would be secure no matter what. I started going back to my church groups and my VFW meetings not as a victim, but as someone who had weathered a storm. My quiet strength seemed to be a source of comfort to others, and I found a new purpose in just being there, in listening. I had reconnected with my community, with my friends, and with myself. I found a sense of peace and freedom I hadn't realized I'd lost, unburdened by the pretense of a happy family that had secretly been rotting from the inside out. The story ends in the spring. The sun was warm on my back, and the soil was soft and smelled of rain and new beginnings. My granddaughter and I were in the small garden patch behind my new condo planting tulips. Her hands were still small enough that she held the trowel with a clumsy, determined seriousness. As we tucked the bulbs into the earth, she looked up at me, her face innocent and serious, and asked the question I knew would come someday. She asked if Mommy would ever come to visit. I paused, my hands buried in the cool, rich soil. I told her as gently as I could that some things in life get so broken that they just can't be fixed. But I said that doesn't mean we can't grow new things. We can plant something beautiful right here. I picked up another bulb, a small, perfect globe of promise for the future, and placed it in her small hands. Our new life was permanent now, smaller, stronger, and built on a foundation of hard-won, painful truth. In the end, Helen's story wasn't truly about revenge. It was about the quiet, unyielding strength required to prune a family tree that had grown a poisoned branch. She understood the desperation that drove her daughter-in-law, the crushing weight of shame and failure that led to such a monstrous choice. But understanding isn't the same as excusing. Her ultimate victory wasn't the dramatic confrontation in the living room, but the quiet moment in the spring garden. It was there, planting new life with her granddaughter, that she taught the most important lesson: true justice isn't just about punishing what's broken, but about having the courage and wisdom to cultivate what can still grow.